Hello, welcome to part 2 of Citizens Forum for this week. It's April 9th, and we are filming in the beautiful Memorial Arena in Victoria. I want to thank the volunteer film crew and Shaw staff who make this all possible. This is the Walter and Jack show, so we're going to start off. The bombing in Boston happened yesterday. This is going to be shown a few days from now. I just want to quickly say something about it. It's happening all over the world now. You know, in countries like Iraq, it's a weekly event. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya now, Syria. So somehow we've got to make this stop and calm the world down. We can't afford to do this as humanity because we've got enough other problems. So the other thing I just want to say is I really hope there is a full and fair and independent and democratic investigation of what happened with full disclosure of the facts, unlike so many other big issues in American politics and history. So I just want to say that.
Jack, but I think, these bombings that are happening overseas, there's done by different people, have different objectives. Some of these are in basically war zones. And
a lot of them are drone attacks done by the U.S. military throughout those countries.
That's another type of terrorism, isn't it?
Thing.
That is a very serious type of terrorism. There's about 3,800 planes that the United States now operate, these drones all over the world, killing hundreds and hundreds of innocent people. But when I heard about the bombings in Boston, they have a certain different flavor than these bombings overseas, and they have a different impact, particularly on the local politics and politics in North America. And what the thing is that I always have trouble with is that I always try to keep an open mind, and I always try to look at the evidence the best I can, do some type of analysis. When a crime occurs, when a good investigator would say, well, who's the suspects, who would benefit from this action, and who's going to pay for it big time if they die and all that. And you can't help but, a good investigator is in fact a good conspiracy theorist, because they're going to line up a lot of different motives, and everybody's a suspect basically in a crime until you find the perpetrator. And what's happening with the Boston bombing, it follows the same sort of trend with the other bombings in the United States, particularly the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11 events, of course, and also the other train station bombings in Western Europe. It has similar.
That's going back many years.
Well, going back, but still, it almost sets your watch on these things, Jack.
Yeah.
I was trying today to find out exactly what is the spacing, and I find that there seems to be almost a rhythm to these bombings. There seems to be a purpose. There seems to be an overriding sort of agenda, and not to go there, not to think about that, I think would be remiss. I think we should be very, very critical and very, very skeptical of those authorities who are supposed to be taking care of us. And in Boston, by the way, they had a huge amount of security. This is not something that was a new idea. Let's have security. They're spending millions and millions of dollars on security already. How could they have two people walk in there with backpacks with bombs, place them, and detonate them? I mean, you have to wonder, well, what the heck is going on here?
Well, I think, if there's an investigation, it has to be from A to Z. But of course, anything is possible. Anything is possible.
Exactly, and that's why we should keep our minds open and not be silenced by critics who say, "Oh, you're just launching into another theory, and this is just terrorism, international terrorism. We have to fight it." Well, I'm not quite there with them on that one. I think there's other people that could really benefit from these types of actions, And we have to look very carefully at those people and see if they're implicated in this type of crime.
Well, no matter what happened or what was the cause of this nightmarish incident, if you go back to 9/11, I mean, there's no question that the issue of involvement of high levels of people within the U.S. government was never looked at. And when you look at the evidence, or when you know a few facts, I mean, you certainly have to raise that issue. I do. I mean, I just don't see how the events could have happened on 9/11 with the official story. I mean, it just, like, for example, why has there never been a photograph of the plane that hit the Pentagon? I mean, something like that. How can that possibly be? Well, it can't possibly be, but no politician dares say it, except a few have in the past. You just never hear it. The media will not report it. And so the years go by, and if you look at what came out of 9/11 was a massive destabilization of the entire Middle East, the deaths of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of completely innocent people came out of 9/11, and we have no idea if the official story is true or not true. I don't believe it. Could I be wrong? Absolutely, I could be wrong. But I mean, nobody's ever run an investigation looking at the facts.
Based upon the evidence, I mean, let's get down to it. Based upon the evidence, there's so many inconsistencies in the official story about what happened September 11th that any rational person is going to conclude that somebody in the U.S. government and in the administration and in the security.
Well, I'll disagree with you, because I know a lot of rational people who don't conclude that for whatever reason.
But I don't think that's rational. I think their expressed opinions are fear-based. And I really think that they're not being rational, and I also believe that the operation itself, because there was so many obvious inconsistencies and things that just can't be explained, that it causes fear, it causes cognitive dissonance in people's minds, and it causes confusion, and in the end, what you end up with is a diminished society. You end up with a society that can't operate in a democratic fashion because they have this intense underlying fear that their own government is capable of committing atrocities on their own people. And that's basically what we're talking about here. And I think that based upon the evidence, 9/11 is a good case, is that, the evidence does point towards that was an inside job. That's a totally rational analysis based upon the evidence laid before me.
Absolutely, totally rational. Not to say that it's correct.
Yeah,
it's totally rational.
From what I know of this case, and I'm certainly not going to be silenced by those who are saying, "Oh no, this is terrorism. This is just the thing that we have to fight every day." And I'm not buying into it. Yeah. There's something else going on, obviously, and with all these series of bombings that goes on. I'm seeing a series of connections between these bombings, and it's not Al-Qaeda or whoever else they want to try to blame it on. To me, it always smacks of some type of insider job. How can you have bombs brought to the finish line of the Boston Marathon when you have millions of dollars worth of security all over the place? It doesn't make sense to me, Jack.
Okay, and probably a lot of people feel the same way. I think anything's possible. Anything's possible. But, as long as we conduct the investigation with that theory in mind, that anything's possible, I'll be... But what a mess. I mean, what a mess in so much of the world, really. We see entire nations collapsing in Europe, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, huge unemployment, austerity, what they're calling austerity, people without jobs. It's a crazy situation. Here in British Columbia, We've got our own provincial election coming up it's going to be May 14th, so that's about a month from now. And to me, I'll follow up on last week's, I'm still planning not to vote. Maybe I will in the end, I don't know, but I'm planning not to vote. I would vote if I thought somebody was one of the parties, or there may be individuals who are pushing democracy. I'll vote for that. To me, one of the biggest issues is the provincial deficit. A lot of this election seems to be so far fought on the issue of deficit or no deficit, debt. The Liberals were on television yesterday or today saying, we are going to get the province out of debt. Well, we had a guest on last week talking about the massive and secret debt they've put us into that we don't even know about. And here, the Premier gets up and says, we're going to, our role is to get you out of debt, so vote for us. And the media doesn't say a word. They don't say, well, Ms. Premier, let's look at the numbers here. How can you possibly say something like that? And the same with the deficit. The only reason for the deficit is the tax cuts. It never gets mentioned. Why doesn't anybody mention in this provincial election that the only reason for the deficit is tax cuts aimed definitely at the 1% and the corporations?
Well, really, and they're just kicking off the election today. I'm already bored. I've already had enough of it, because nothing is being said, nothing is going to be said that's meaningful. You have the NDP 20-point lead in the polls right now, Jack. 20-point lead. The Liberal Party, really, based on their record, shouldn't exist after the next election. There's just too much corruption, too much scandal. There's too much disarray in that party. They simply will probably disappear. But the thing is that
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. We have another it's not another dictatorship, but we have another party that's taking the helm. There'll be no opposition. Isn't that nice? Just like what the Liberals had for all those years. And it's business as usual. And, on the big issue, for instance, on the economy, and Eric Anderson mentioned this last week, was, that it's almost like 2/3 of the debt that the government has assumed with these contractual relationships, most of which are deals they've signed with independent power producers, maybe worth around $75 billion in future commitments, massive debt load on the public, of buying power that we don't need. We're turning off our turbines and buying power from independent power producers at up to 10 times as much as what we can generate ourselves. It's ludicrous. It is in every other sense, Jack, it's criminal. These contracts are just, they fly in the face of reason that anyone could sign this in good faith. These contracts should not be honored. They all should be renegotiated back into a universe that everybody else lives in. It's just not reasonable. And the problem is, Jack, was that neither the NDP or the Greens are talking about it. They're not talking about this issue. So, of course, the Liberals don't want to talk about it because they signed all the deals. But it's a let's pretend election. This huge debt we're faced with, and our children will be paying for, and their children, we're not talking about it. To me, those are the sort of things that make me very sad about this province. And it's, we have the parties all cooperating, sort of, and of course the media not asking any questions.
And I mean, who's running the show? Who's running the show? And I mean, could I be wrong when I say it's the corporations? Of course I could be wrong, but that's sure what I think. When you look at who seems to benefit from all the decisions that our governments make, it always seems to be the 1% and the corporations. Or it's actually the 1% of the 1% who are really maybe calling the shots. We're creating a society with massive gap in income and wealth. It's being done deliberately. Our schools, don't have the money that's necessary. Public education is being starved. And it is, as you say, it's a make-believe election. And somehow we citizens of this province and of this country have got to create for ourselves a media that is going to tell us the actual truth about what's going on. Everybody in the province should know that we signed, is it 40, 50, or 60 billion dollars worth of long-term commitments with independent power, basically corporate-owned power that are damaging our rivers right across the province, damaging our rivers.
That's right.
In order to provide power that we don't need, but we have to buy at 5 to 10 times what we can sell it for the next 30 years. And we've indebted ourselves, and we don't even know. They don't even bother to tell us.
I know, it's so sad. There's in all those dams, there's another pipe that nobody sees, and that's the big economic pipe that's stuck into those dams that drains off money from British Columbia out of our economy, by the way. When you're paying off these guys, that's international money that leaves our economy. That is a staggering debt load, especially because the money leaves the province. It's just simply, it's like planting a garden, letting it come up, and just 3/4 of it, just pull it up and throw it away. Sooner or later, the garden's going to fail because we're not doing anything for it. And these sort of contracts, really, objectively looking at these deals, if I was in government, I would say, okay, stop the music. We're going to renegotiate these contracts.
Absolutely, I'm with you 100%. The province of BC should renegotiate these contracts and make something that's fair for us, because I don't think these contracts are fair for the people of BC. Do you know anything about them? Speaking to the viewers and the listeners, why don't we know anything about this? Why? Well, I'll tell you why. Because they don't want us to know. They don't want us involved in these issues.
Eric Anderson was your interview last week, and it was very good. I really enjoyed it. And he touched on the sort of Enron bookkeeping that BC Hydro, the Liberal government's now using, and the provincial government. And it's so funny, Enron, harkens back all those years. But, BC Hydro has a very close relationship with Enron. And BC Hydro was found guilty in California courts for price gouging.
And that was the Enron scandal.
Part of the Enron scandal.
That's right.
They got on the phone and they asked somebody to turn off a power plant, and they would just turn it off. It would create fake shortages, create huge uncertainty. The California government was just flailing, trying to find power, buying it at any cost, sometimes 15, 25 times the rate of what the normal...
People were being bankrupted in California trying to pay their power bills.
Exactly. And BC Hydro was right in on that. And of course, that was during the previous NDP regime. And the thing is that the comments, what was so laughable was, of course, John Horgan couldn't find any problem with it. The NDP energy critic couldn't find any problem, really didn't think there was much there.
Now you're talking about when BC Hydro was just found guilty, I think, in a California court.
That's right.
And I don't remember what the result of that.
Well, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that they have to pay back, and that has to be resolved yet. If you read part of the court case, which I did, it's online, it's damning evidence. It's point by point by point how they pulled the scam off. But what gets me is of course, John Horgan's going to defend his old buddies back in the other government, the other NDP regime, saying we don't think that they really didn't act improperly. Rich Coleman says he's looked at this, doesn't really see a problem with it. Come on, it's a criminal act. These guys gouged them. They did something illegal, and we're not supposed to know about it. How do the Californians feel about British Columbians right now? We have to realize that our government, acting in our behalf, gouged the Californians unfairly for power. And they were tied into, of course, the Enron crowd. And one can't forget what happened with BC Hydro, because a good chunk of the decision makers that ran the Enron situation arrived in British Columbia.
You know, it's worth noting that the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, CIBC, was also in there. I read part of the FBI case against them. It was amazing what they said about CIBC. And CIBC paid, I believe it was $3.4 billion. CIBC paid $3.4 billion to extricate themselves from a lawsuit being brought against Enron and them by a bunch of pension funds. Imagine that, pension funds.
Yeah.
So, and nobody knows about it because the media doesn't report it. Look what the media chooses to report, and look what they choose not to report.
I mean, let's be hard on the media a little longer. I mean, I was just reading the local dailies here on the coffee table as you were doing your interview, and I always browse the letters. You know, I like to get into the editorial pages and see what the locals are saying about their issues. Goldstream Gazette, I think you have the Peninsula Review that actually had a couple letters that were different, but the Oak Bay News, Victoria News, same commentary on the editorial page, same letters to the editor. What is this? Is this local news, or wouldn't you think they'd allow some local writers to talk about the issues that are pertaining to their communities? We're not seeing that in the black press anymore. And by the way, the black press, you know, is David Black is promoting this big
natural
gas refinery up in Kitimat.
Oh, he's proposing the oil refinery
oils,
in Kitimat, right?
That. But you know, how is the media going to be objective
when he owns the media?
A potentially devastating thing that could devastate the environment in British Columbia. We have our media barons now promoting it openly. Do we expect to see any open criticism in any of those newspapers from now on this issue?
Yeah,
let's look for it. I haven't seen any yet.
That's the Victoria News Group with the Saanich News, Victoria News, Oak Bay News,
that's
the
right.
whole news thing.
They're all owned by one
Press,
interest.
right. We've only got a few minutes left. I just want to touch a bit. We've got 5 minutes left. I just want to touch a bit on amalgamation. I've noticed CFAX used to really push amalgamation, and I noticed that again recently. And it always makes me nervous when I see CFAX pushing an issue because I don't think they work for us. I think they're owned by Bell Media. Bell Media is owned by BCE, one of the biggest corporations in the country. I naturally think that CFAX does what BCE wants. They don't do what the people of Victoria want necessarily, although I'm sure they're all very nice people there. When the radio station starts pushing amalgamation, and it doesn't really give us a lot of facts and figures or a balanced approach on a very important issue, it's a little bit dangerous for all of the rest of us because maybe it isn't the best thing to do. What I've noticed is that, you know, throughout the media, whenever something goes wrong now, they say, oh, if we had amalgamation, that problem wouldn't happen. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. You know, a couple of years ago, CFAX had on somebody from Portland and talking about the great public transit system they have in Portland. I mean, it leads the nation, right, in the United States. It's great, or so we keep hearing. And the guy here, the CFAX host, was saying, well, you know, we can't do anything here because we've got 13 different municipalities that we have to deal with. And the guy from Portland said, yeah, well, we have, I think the number was 22 municipalities, cities, different levels of government, counties, and other official bodies that they had to deal with, and they got it done because there they want to get it done. Right here, things don't happen because the power structure doesn't want to get them done. I'm afraid that if we amalgamate, we're going to have politicians who are more professional, meaning you need more money to get elected, and who are they going to be working for? If amalgamation works, I'm 100% for it, if it's good. But what I want is an informed debate, not cheerleading from the media who I don't trust.
Well, whenever they're advocating it, I automatically get worried. Why are they advocating for it? Why are the media advocating for it? I mean, amalgamation is shown to be very, very costly in other jurisdictions where it's occurred. If you want to talk about policing, we have a CRD, by the way, Jack, that could easily, manage regional issues a little better and make the CRD more democratic also, not this sort of old boys club that we have that we're dealing with. You don't have to have amalgamation to have cooperation, as you say. So I think really, in the end, you are always trading off of having these small councils that may not have the resources and may not have the background to make some development decisions. That might do better if they're in a larger setting with counselors that had more background and have more resources to pay for studies and such. But when you balance that all out, I have not seen anywhere where we've really found a successful amalgamation, and that's the thing to look for. And they've always been very costly to the taxpayers. So the evidence is not very good for amalgamation.
Okay, we've got about 1 minute left. I saw a story in the newspaper just a few days ago. It was a young woman in her early 20s, and the story was basically, I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I went to university, I did great, I volunteered, I did all the stuff that I was told to do, and now I've graduated and there's no jobs. And I just want to say that this is the plan, folks. I mean, this has been planned out. The jobs have been sent overseas, and that's what our leadership has done to us. They have deliberately, through these free trade deals, created a society that works very well for the people on top, but it just doesn't mean jobs for us, right? We're the ones who are going to have to pay the price. I just want to know that we can fix that. We just need federal politicians, provincial politicians. We need democracy. Tell us what's going on, find out what we want, and do it. That's my message to the politicians. Thanks very much for watching this segment of the Walter and Jack Show on Citizens Forum. But before we go, we're going to end with something a little bit different. We're going to just show a little bit of video taken at beautiful Swan Lake. This video was shot a couple of weeks ago, and it just shows how beautiful the real world is. We should all, I think, take a little more time to, as they say, smell the roses and take a look. Our industrial society is so fast. Our world is so crazy. This is just a view of something that we all see all the time, but it's a bit different.